slow.
Good evening, Gabija from the Irish Independent. Dr. Holohan, yesterday we saw another woman involved in the CervicalCheck scandal, Lynsey Bennett, who had to go through the High Court to seek security for the future for family and children. There was settlement but no admission of liability, and while regret was expressed, there was no apology. It is 2 years since the news of the CervicalCheck scandal has emerged, and some women have even passed away in that time while others are terminally ill. Is this an acceptable way to treat women that were affected, and should they still be compelled to enter a long and combative legal process?
Well, you know, a lot of work has been undertaken across government to try and provide mechanisms that are as patient-centred and as woman-centred as they possibly can. The Minister's been having ongoing engagements with representatives to enable him to inform government about what the next and appropriate steps are. Arrangements are in place in relation to that to try to learn some of the lessons, not only what happened in relation to CervicalCheck and how to put in place arrangements to prevent those things from happening again in terms of the actual service, but also to learn the lessons from the experience that people have had who have been harmed and who have very reasonable questions that they want answers to and want to have recourse to mechanisms to have those questions addressed, and significant effort to be made to try and address both of those.
You are the Chief Medical Officer for the country. Would you like to apologise to Lynsey Bennett?
I think I'm not aware of the facts of the particular case. I am aware that there was a settlement, but I don't know any of the details. I know that a letter was read out in respect of that particular case by the clinical director of the programme that's addressed that issue.
Would you like to apologise to any of the other women that have been affected by the CervicalCheck scandal? Lynsey Bennett is not the first and probably won't be the last.
Well, the state, as you know, and the Taoiseach in the past on a number of occasions has apologised in relation to what has happened. A very significant harm has been done to people who've had the experience over the course of the last number of years. The harm at the centre of CervicalCheck, it's important that you're clear on this, was that there was not disclosure to women of the findings of a retrospective clinical audit of their care, where there was a commitment to give that information back to individuals. The information wasn't in fact given to those individuals. There was very significant hurt for those individuals. It was investigated in great detail. You're aware of the investigations that took place, I'm quite sure. 2 major investigations, one by Professor Scally, another by the Royal College of Obstetricians. There were not findings in terms of adverse functioning of the programme. The programme met the quality standards, but certainly there were findings of substantial wrong in terms of failure to deliver on commitments, to share information with women. A lot of learning has been gleaned, if you like, from those experiences and has now been applied into the ongoing operation of the programme. And the way the programme is now moving is to incorporate HPV testing. As I'm sure you're aware, into the testing, this is a much more reliable test. It doesn't rely on the observations of a doctor or the observations of a technician in making assessments in relation to a particular individual woman, which is where so much of the challenge, if you like, of the operation of the cytology test arises, that there can be often differences of opinion between observers, and we know that test, while a good test from a screening point of view, was not a perfect test, and a lot of individuals, whereas the programme would have attempted through the application of that screening to find as many cases of pre-invasive disease before cancer occurs. We know that not every case can be found through that technology. There's new, better technology. There are learnings now arising from the handling, if you like, of the information and the failure to share that information with women in respect of clinical audit.
So you're right, the Taoiseach and the state did apologise because, of course, CervicalCheck did fall under their remit. It also fell under your remit. And it was also, I suppose, under your responsibilities too.
It was.
So I suppose they have apologised. Would you like to also apologise to those women that have been affected?
Well, I certainly have a huge amount of regret as to what's happened to women in those situations. We can go back over the facts if you wish of that. Those facts are a matter of public record. They were set out in the investigations that were conducted by both Professor Scally and then laterally by the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists that essentially repeated the audit that was done at the time. The cervical screening programme, which has existed since just before 2010, was a programme that was organised as a population-based programme. It was one of the few programmes in the world that introduced quality assurance arrangements that consisted of a retrospective clinical audit. So in other words, it took cases where cancer was diagnosed, asked how could it be that this cancer arose even though we have a screening program in place, recognising that will happen. No screening program can prevent the emergence of every single case of cervical cancer. Asked that question, went back retrospectively to see did that give an opportunity for learnings to be gleaned and to be applied to improving the standard of operation of that program. There was a commitment then with that information that was gleaned in respect of an individual to share that information back with the women concerned. The only other country in the world in which that commitment exists in terms of the operation of a cervical screening program is the UK. No other country shares that information. Many programs in other countries have expressed policies to not share that information. But the policy in this country for the program was to share that information back with individuals. The clinical program that operated the cervical screening program shared that information back to their clinicians. But the clinicians didn't share that information with individuals, women. The program operated on the basis that it believed the information was being shared, but it wasn't. So we know that there were design failures in the operation of that particular program, and particularly the commitment to share the information back with individual women. When all of this began with the coming to light of the case of Vicky Phelan, it wasn't known that that was the case, and it was only investigations that were put in train by the Department of Health and the screening program in the first instance that systematically, in a couple of days of that information, identified that of approximately 200 cases, maybe up to 3/4 of those cases, the women concerned did not have that information shared back with them in the first instance. That was the first time that fact was known as a result of an inquiry that was put in train by the department in response to the Vicky Phelan case. Those findings then provided the basis for both the Scally inquiry to be put in train and for the ORCOG, the Royal College of Obstetricians inquiry, to be put in train. Both of those two things were put in train, and they could only have been informed by that initial piece of work that we did in the department within that short couple of days to establish that in fact the failure here to systematically share that information back with women was identified. So it was only when that was identified that for the first time, if you like, that Vicky Phelan's experience was not a unique experience. In fact, it was a common experience. It appeared nobody knew that fact up until that point in time. The purpose of the Scally inquiry was to establish why that was the case and apply all the various different learnings. And then obviously the Royal College of Obstetricians inquiry was about establishing whether the actual clinical standards and the cytology standards that pertain to the programme, that should pertain to the programme based on international standards, were met or not met. Both of those two inquiries are completed and have substantially found that the programme operated to a very high standard, that within its basic operational requirement to prevent cervical cancer, did that to a population level that reached international standards, but that the commitment in respect of the feeding back of information gleaned from retrospective clinical audit, as I say, one of only 2 countries in the world that had that commitment, that standard was not met, and that was wrong and simply shouldn't have happened. But that fact simply wasn't known at the point at which this first came to light with the public information of the Vicky Phelan case.
And do you have huge sympathy for the women that have been affected by this? Of course,
and I do it now, but I've done it on many occasions in the past, expressed that freely, openly, absolutely, as various ministers at this point, and more than one Taoiseach has done. An enormous sympathy for the women concerned, because it was a basic commitment to women that wasn't honoured. Each woman in that situation believed, and had every reason to believe, that this information would be shared. It wasn't shared. So the failure which was at the centre of the CervicalCheck, the failure to feed back the information that was gleaned from retrospective clinical audit was something that simply shouldn't have happened. But it didn't impact the clinical care of those women, because this was after the fact, after the diagnosis was made. This is after. It was information that wasn't known. It only came to light, or could have come to light, after the fact. So it couldn't have been applied in the ongoing clinical management, so it's just important to point that out. So the failure in respect of this particular programme was the failure to honour a commitment that was given, that wasn't lived up to, to share that information back with women.